Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, and it is time for another Coach's Mailbag, where I bring on a tremendous instructional tennis mind to help answer your questions and comments about tennis as a game itself. Chris Lewit is the guest this week. Previously, we've had Hugh Clark, we've had Jonathan Stokey. Chris is a high-performance tennis coach, my childhood coach, the coach who developed my game, which, of course, as you know, didn't amount to all that much, not because of Chris's coaching, but because of my lack of talent, ability, and genetics. However, I believe what I did learn under Chris's tutelage did become instrumental in ultimately having success in achieving what was actually my goal as a child growing up, which was to become a sports broadcaster, because all of that knowledge that I gained on the court helped me develop this tennis podcast that you are now watching or listening to. I believe it's, the good coaching is where all of that knowledge started. Anyway, this is kind of half conversation because the United Cup is coming up. And Chris is always pretty interested in national development strategy. United Cup is where these things come to bear. And obviously the countries, both men and women, develop rosters and battle each other for United Cup titles. So I thought this was a good time to talk to Chris about national development strategies. And then that'll be the first 30 minutes, along with some other things I'm interested in asking him about, like the 3-4-5 tactical system and the NextGen Forehand. And then the last 30 minutes will be answering your comments in the conventional mailbag style. So without further ado, here is Chris Lewit. We're joined once again by Chris Lewit, my childhood coach, Chris Lewit Tennis Academy, author of is it 2 books going on 3 now?
Yeah, this would be 3 now. They're updates, so this one
Yeah.
is the second edition, and then another new technique book. Yeah.
Another's coming up. That's exciting. Always good to see you. Always good to get together and talk some ball the way we're going to do this. And maybe I'll say this in the intro as well, but we're going to do first 30 minutes. We'll just talk, and then we'll get to the viewer comments for the last 30 minutes.
Well, I always enjoy talking about tennis and anything related to the Pro Tour. You have an extensive knowledge of the Pro Tour yourself.
Let's start here. I'm always asked, not always, but often asked, explain why certain countries are doing better than others. Explain why we have so many Czech women having incredible success. So many Italian men in the last 5 years have come up, and the depth is insane. Or even a question like, why hasn't the United States been able to produce a slam champion? These are questions that are pretty common for me to hear. And I'll admit, I always have a good amount of trouble answering it. Like, how do you go about answering that question when, if you're not on the ground, if you're not like, it almost feels so big or almost too big to answer. But I know that these are questions that you're fascinated in. Some of them, like particularly in regards to Spain, that you've studied. So let me ask you first, like, how do you go about answering those sorts of questions?
Okay, I really enjoy that topic, and I think other people do as well. They find it, they're very curious about it. And like if I write about it or post about it, I get a lot of commentary and a lot of people chime in and they want to know. And I think some of those answers I can give you more clearly, especially considering Spain, which I've studied in Spain for 20 years, 20 years of my life. I've focused on Spanish tennis, but Italy is quite close to Spain. And so I think I see strong connections there, and I can make some good arguments there. Czech Republic, I think, is fascinating, and I have not studied. I want to learn. There may be a new book like The Secrets of the Czech Republic Tennis, because that is an incredible story for a country 10 million strong, only 10 million people, and the U.S. has I think U.S. I'm closely connected to. Obviously, I'm a top American coach, so I have a lot. I think I have insight into what's going on in the U.S. But to answer your question about how do you attack it, where people go wrong is they don't realize it's multifactorial. There's many factors that are affecting the rise of a country or the fall of a country. Anything from like demographics to like geopolitical to economic to infrastructure. There's like lots. And not to mention the coaching methodology, the participation, like genetically, like what of the population are they getting the best genetic influence, uh, technique, strategy, financial, how much the federations are putting money into their players, infrastructure of the professional tournaments at different in different countries. There's many factors. So where people get off courses, they try to like zone in on just one or two, and they say this is the reason. And I think that's the most important thing. You should be careful of not falling into that trap.
I think for Italy, the most common fascination has been the number of low level tournaments that they've made sure exist in their country. So tons of ITFs, tons of futures, tons of challengers. And that's been the main area. Like if you talk about focusing on one thing and making it like, so that's your answer, I think for Italy, which I think particularly in 2024, they just had an incredible year on the tour. That's been sort of the thing that people have gravitated towards. How much credence do you give to the theory that Italy's secret sauce has been the number of low-level professional tournaments that they've been able to create?
Yeah, I think that's a foundation, and that's a proven approach. It happened in Spain. Spain did the same thing. They expanded their professional tournaments. The U.S. has a lot of professional tournaments. I certainly don't think that can't be the primary factor. It's got to be a factor, like that makes the events more available, that helps their juniors spend less money to collect ATP points and things like that, or even ITF points. But I can't believe that that's the main driver. Like for me, it's much more about, I mean, maybe it's my bias because I'm a coach and I love to study coaching methodologies and philosophies. But for me, there has to have been, and I haven't studied in Italy like in Spain, but I have studied from afar some of Piatti's method, and I think he's one of the top Italian coaches. And there has to have been a major shift in the coaching paradigm, the philosophy of how they bring up players, the work ethic, the willingness to sacrifice, things that are maybe less tangible. Like you can't just point to a tournament structure. But I think the psychological aspects and the way the coaches are operating, the passion, the drive of the coaches there, to me, is there's people on the ground that are actually making this happen. It's not just like the structure that the Italian Tennis Federation put in.
Piatti's an interesting figure, and you texted me something pretty interesting about Yannick Sinner because you feel like he actually has some Spanish way, some Spanish influence in his game. Where do you see that? Where do you see Spanish in Sinner?
For sure, just he's very good baseliner, obviously very consistent, and he moves beautifully. I mean, this is the new Italian tennis, really strong baseline play, great movers. It sounds a lot like Spanish tennis, when Spain was at its peak, this is what they were famous for. Obviously, they play. Piatti has taken a lot of the methodology and philosophy from Spain, a focus on movement and footwork, a focus on a prioritization of positioning, of being in balance, is controlling the ball. He's also not as technical as you would expect. He has broad technical parameters. He believes in a variation of the ball, very like simple strategies like changing direction and variation of the ball, things you would hear in Spain. A lot of when he speaks, there's a lot of Spanish influence there, and he admits that. He's admitted that in interviews that he's studied extensively in Spain. So I don't think it's a huge secret, but
Yeah.
for me, the powerful coaches at work in the trenches, they are what I think. There's this like great coach effect. Like great coaches build players like wherever they are. So I'm always looking for who's there, like who's there in the early years, who has the passion and the drive, who's developing these types of players. Sinner is I like the way I like the way his mind is. He doesn't make any excuses. He's willing to sacrifice. He's an incredibly hard worker, and I think that's the new model for Italy, for Italian players. In the past, Italian players, for better or worse, sort of had a reputation as kind of playboys, maybe a little bit lazy. They didn't really work the way they were always talented, sort of like French players. Like they had a lot of panache, and they didn't really have the guts or the sacrifice, and that has been completely turned on its head. And I think Sinner is leading the way.
Yeah, there's an immense amount of discipline in Sinner's game, like the way
Yeah.
he actually goes about playing points. And then off the court, you can see that as well. There's no chance you can have a 10-month season as consistent as he had if you don't have the discipline off the court and you're not taking care of yourself in every way possible. So I like that. And then you have Alcaraz, leading Spanish tennis, and we can discuss Spanish tennis in the sense that it doesn't quite look like the mid 2010s. You don't have this like stacked top 20, like 4 or 5 guys in the top 20 like there was for a period of time, but you still have Alcaraz at the top. And I think we discussed this last time we chatted, but doesn't exactly fit that classic Spanish mold because he is so creative. He is incredibly daring. He's somewhat of a risk taker, but he has the skills, the tools to kind of back that up. So I don't know, just thinking about it, it's a bit of a reversal. When you look at Alcaraz and Sinner, you would almost think based on their nationalities, it would go the other way.
That is a really interesting counterpoint to put two of them to juxtapose those two players. I think that's interesting analysis. I actually never thought of that, but it's true. Alcaraz does not play like a typical Spaniard. In many ways, he's redefining what it means to play Spanish tennis, what it means to be a Spanish player. I'm sure you're going to see more young players coming out of Spain who play more like him because he's so charismatic. He's so dynamic. Everyone wants to be like him. Everyone wants to play like him. All of my students want to play like him. All of my students want to learn the drop shot now. I mean, he just that alone, like he's reinstituted the drop shot as a go-to shot, which, a couple decades ago, you never saw someone use the shot like that. And so a lot of kids are modeling him in Spain and outside of Spain. And I think you're right. The way Sinner operates is a little bit more like Nadal, just the professionalism, like to just get the work done, no excuses. Very much like the mantra of Tony Nadal, the philosophy of Tony Nadal. No excuses, sacrifice, and stay humble. Like humility too is a really big part. And Alcaraz is very humble for a champion. That's a big part of the Spanish method, and you see that more in Italy as well.
In the US, and then I'm going to leave the national development thing in a moment. I have some other questions for you, but in the US, there's been a lot of movement in how they've operated. You had Jose Higueras, who kind of built up this player development program that some of the players we're seeing have success now went through, some didn't, right? Some went the independent route, never joined the USTA, but you had this very kind of stiff structure within the USTA. And it seems they're now getting away from that. It's no secret that funding of the player development program has been cut. There have been some restructurings. So now they're kind of going a different way. And I feel like one of the core debates, Chris, that I want your take on is when a kid is having a lot of success, do you take them away from the coaches who developed that kid and you bring them to a national center, or do you let them stay? Like, should you stay with the coach that was sort of got you to a certain place where now the federation is taking interest in you?
I think that's a good question. It's definitely case by case because there are examples of kids who maybe they outgrow their personal coach who took them along the early years and they need to get a more professional environment or they need to get some additional training, and that could be justified. But as you know, there are many cases where a kid is doing great and the federation can cherry pick a kid, and that can be very detrimental to their growth. So it really is. I don't think it's negative. It's definitely negative or positive. Really depends on a case by case basis, based on the kid and what their situation is. The story of American tennis in the USTA for me, and I may be biased because I'm close to Jose Higueras. I studied personally with Jose Higueras. I think he's incredible personally as a coach and just as a person. He's like unbelievable life story. And he's been very generous to me. So, but I really believe I try to step back objectively. I really think that he and Patrick McEnroe did overall a very good job. And I feel like they laid the groundwork for what we're seeing now because there's a delay. It's not like you just get in there and you work and the players just pop out. There's like they have to bake in the oven. And then a lot of the players that you're seeing now, like Tiafoe and Tommy Paul, are great examples. I mean, they've been with the USDA a lot. I remember going to their training camps with Jose and many of the players, even that were not with the USDA, they were getting help with funding and things like that. So I think that what they did, and I think Jose was there 9 years, in the early 2010s. I think that's laid the groundwork for what we're seeing now. And I think it's probably a really big mistake to cut their funding and like basically destroy that whole player development program. Basically it's been taken apart, the entire
Mhm.
player development program. And a lot of PD coaches, national coaches have said the same thing. Like the same thing is a big mistake. But then this is the problem with the USDA. You get new governance every few years, and then there's just no like good direction. But for me, I think that was a successful project. It gets a lot of heat and criticism. It's my point of view is it was pretty successful. Look, the level of American men and women right now on the top, it's unbelievable with almost 20 women in the top 100 and 10 to 14 male players in the top 100. It's an unbelievable renaissance. So somebody has to take some credit for the USDA and what they did in the early 2010s. I think they did a good job overall, you know.
I agree. I mean, I agree that the results are good at the very least. Starting there, I want to ask you about the specifics of the updates of your book. So, like, what has this process been like? You told me off air it's been about 10 years where you've kind of gone through your book, Secrets of Spanish Tennis, and looked for areas to update. So, what are how would you summarize that process and some of the things you found?
Yeah, I'm really proud of this book because I look back. There's a lot of it's very autobiographical when you write a book and you look back on it. And I went and working on the second edition. There's so many memories that I have. Almost 20 years of going many, like probably 30 or more study trips to Spain, and there's just a lot of my own personal memories in the book. And a lot has changed in 10 years. A lot has changed since 2014 when Spain really did dominate men's tennis. Spain has declined somewhat, and at the same time, they've had this the incredible rise of Alcaraz. So I tried to talk about that in the book, tried to address that. I have a new chapter on Alcaraz. I have new chapters on like Tony Nadal, like the method and philosophy of Tony Nadal. And we added a lot more, put in a lot more interesting drills. So there's 45 Spanish exercises, and they all have companion videos on my YouTube channel. So like people that want to learn the drills, they can actually see them and visualize them, which I think is very powerful. A lot of the readers of the book have told me they found that helpful to have all the videos for all the drills rather than just on a page. You know, the idea of learning technique or a methodology just in print on a book, I think is very old fashioned now. You need to have video to try to explain things. People learn better that way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's I just updated. There's so much has changed in terms of facts and basically I tried to expand the book and it's almost double the length of the original. The original was a really good pocket book. It was pretty sim. I wrote it very simply for coaches, like almost like you could flip through it like a manual. And I'm really proud of this book. It's really thorough. And after 20 years, I look at it and I say, like, this is I'm really proud to share this with people. You know, this body of work that I spent so many hours not only researching and traveling and then finally like compiling and conveying it to people.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to reading it and to picking it up. Obviously, I really loved the first one, the shorter one, which was a very quick and easier kind of read. Speaking of updates, of the many things that I learned training under you, one of the things that I still use a ton is the tactical framework, particularly the the four intentions, or no, the four decision makers and the five intentions. Did I get those the other way? Yeah, I think I got it right. So the four decision makers, right? Incoming ball, outgoing ball, your court position, your opponent's court position. And basically every time you hit a shot, those are the things that are going to be factoring in, determining your intention. Then the five intentions were counterattacking, neutralizing, trading, building, and finishing. It's been not to age myself. It's been a long time since I was at your academy, and we were working on these things as a framework. So I want to ask: have there been any updates to that approach, that tactical system, if you will?
I love that system, and that's not entirely Spanish. That's sort of an amalgam of some different coaches that I studied with and learned from, and but it relates to Spain in terms of the three zones. So it's 3-4-5 system or method,
Right.
and the three zone. You also have the three zones which help you make the decision. So what zone are you in? So are you deep behind the baseline, which is typically in Spain called zone three, just for simplicity's sake, 3-2-1. Zone 2 is the middle, like the mid court. That's where you typically attack or transition. and zone one is the net. So typically, when you watch pro tennis or any kind of tennis match, even a recreational match, you'd like to flow through those zones. You'd like to be consistent from the zone three, and then you typically look to attack from zone two. You typically don't want to try too many attacks from zone three, where you're not in great position. And then you try to flow and transition to zone one, where you have a great, based on the geometry, you can hit a short angle volley and you have a chance to put away the ball. Not every point goes exactly that structure, but that is a very good way to think about tennis and strategy in the three zones. And I teach that all the time. And the intentions are the decision maker. I think you're very right. They're so helpful. Like if you just think about your position, what type of incoming ball am I getting? And then what type of outgoing ball am I hitting? How strong was my shot? You see the pros, when they hit a strong shot, they usually take ground.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see if they hit a weak shot, they usually give ground. So the right away, that's the beginning of tactical court sense and awareness. And you see the best players in the world do that. And then in terms of the intentions, I think that's also very helpful too, because you have the five intentions, and most kids that I coach, and I coach some adults too, serious adults, and at all levels, they don't usually like to bang the ball really hard. Like their only intention is like kill, like power, like there is. Do you remember that there's different ways to build that because
Yeah, yeah, I do.
the attack, because that's what I like to get into with the player. I like to challenge them, because usually I say, so how can you attack? How do you build your points? And usually they say power. Typically, kids want to hit the ball really hard, or and rec players too. If I make a YouTube video, I probably want to include the keyword power in it, because people always want power. But look, you can use the drop shot like Alcaraz does. You can use angles. You can use high balls. People really don't like high balls. Spanish players make a lot of money hitting high topspin balls that people don't like. So there's a lot of different ways to build and attack. I think that's very important. But that is a really good framework to think about the game. I enjoy, you can, when you understand that basic framework, like that 3-4-5, I think it's really interesting to watch tennis on TV, or to watch a video of yourself, and just watch how the decisions are made, and what court position you're in, and or the players in, and you can really up your like tactical IQ by applying that framework to watching tennis.
Yeah, and I do that all the time. And I mean, at this point, it's been molded into my subconscious almost.
That
But when I
that's going to
see
help your commentating, Gil. That's
it
going to help your
is
commentary. You're going
a
to
hundred
sound really
percent.
smart. You're going to sound really smart.
Yeah. Look, when I see a down the line change on a backhand, that might go 3 feet wide, and like the first thing I do is I go through, okay, like was the opponent off the court? Was the ball coming in short? Was it coming in slow? No. Okay. It's just a loss of discipline. It was a low percentage attempt. These things just get baked in. So I love that. I just wanted to follow
Good.
up with you on that.
You're a good student. You always were.
uh, One thing that was I don't remember at the time being in the public discourse was this whole concept, and we're going to go to viewer comments after this. This whole concept of the next gen forehand, and as best I can tell, and I'm not the technique geek that you are or that many others are. I like to keep it pretty basic from a technique standpoint. But obviously, this next gen forehand fever is is undeniable. And one thing that's very noticeable is the setup with the racket face facing the back fence. You see it with Sinner, you see it with Paolini, you see it with Peyton Stearns, who has one of the biggest forehands on the women's side. Like you definitely have a lot of really, really big, heavy forehands that are utilizing that. I'm going to give you the floor. That's all I got. What do you think of the next gen forehand?
Obviously, I do love this discussion. As we were talking off air, I have a new book coming out on biomechanics next year called Winning Pretty. And I'm going back to school. In a year or two, I'll be on a master's PhD track for biomechanics and kinesiology. So this is my passion. I love Spanish tennis, obviously, but biomechanics is really what I love. I love studying human movement. So in any sport, but the next gen form, that's typically what defines the next gen form, is the inversion of the strings, like you said, where the strings are facing the back fence. And I can't prove this, but I mean, it may be something I'll study in graduate school. But basically what the biomechanists think that puts your internal shoulder rotators on you get a little more stretch, free stretch of the internal shoulder rotator, so that when you're coming through, when you release it, you're getting just a touch more acceleration in the racket head. So that's sort of the theory. We don't know for sure if that's true or not, but sure, a lot of players are doing it and they're getting heavy balls out of it. Sinner obviously is the most famous. It's interesting that a lot of the up and coming Italian players have that next gen forehand. It could just be a coincidence, or is someone, I haven't studied in Italy, so I don't know if someone's actually encouraging some of the Italian players to use that technique. But that's basically, I think, the bottom line is when, you know what, a decade ago or more, I would try to fix that with my students. I would say, no, that's too extreme, and you're going to have a hard time making clean impact by turning the strings away from the incoming ball. I remember one student, I spent a lot, regrettably, I probably spent a number of lessons trying to fix that and finally gave up. But maybe I shouldn't have wasted. I should have just let him run with it. But I think that's the base. That's generally the idea, is that you can get a little more stretch of the internal rotators of the shoulder, and that way there's a stretch shortening cycle that happens there. The tendons and the muscles get put on a little more stretch by rotating the shoulder this way, and possibly maybe even in the forearm. And
Mhm.
that to me is the only biomechanical reason I can think of why players would be gravitating towards that style. I don't think it's just a comfort thing. I think it's something it's probably doing a little more on the stretch shortening cycle for acceleration, for the generating racket speed coming through. And it may contribute to, it may be associated with higher RPM. So that's
Yeah.
my guess, but I can't prove that.
Right. I know at this point, like if I played around with it, it would feel incredibly unnatural. When you have a young, when you have really young players who are still very moldable, is that something that I mean, do you nudge them that direction, or do you just see what they do and you go with that?
Yeah, I try to work with parameters, and that's something I talk about in the new technique book. I think that working with parameters is better than forcing a player into one model. I really try to make the case for that, to try to put some guide rails up or some guardrails, and then let the player find their best technique within those guidelines. But I haven't specifically really been teaching that yet. I do teach like an ATP four and a modern four, and I like to get the lag, and I like to get the backswing compact and generate a lot of energy from the kinetic chain from the legs. But it may be something I might start encouraging more if I can see some research. I like to work with evidence. So if I can see some evidence, maybe in a research study or some sort of in a biomechanics journal, that shows that there may be an advantage that does correlate to higher spin rates, for example, then I would definitely like jump on the bandwagon and say, oh, maybe I should start teaching this to children or to adults. Right now, I am seeing that a lot in my practice on the court. I actually see a lot of I work with a lot of top young juniors. A lot of kids are just gravitating towards that. Maybe just they're seeing it a lot on the tour. They're seeing a lot of setups like that. Kids are very visual. And so without me actually telling them, I see a lot of players turning their racket like this. I have a young boy, 10 years old. He's going to be one of the top players in New York soon. And he has the exact, like, looks like kind of like Sinner.
Hmm.
And actually, I took him to Spain this summer, and the coaches there, they didn't, or wherever he goes, people, a lot of traditional coaches, like they're shocked. They're like, no, 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 10 years old, it needs to be like a lot simpler and cleaner. And I'm like, no, it's going to be incredible. He's got it already at 10, and he's doing it beautifully. Leave it alone. But some of the Spanish coaches really sort of shook his confidence, because they were telling him, no, 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 you need to wait till you're older. He has it already now, like a Sinner forehand at 10, and I'm gonna I know well enough to leave it alone. I'm not gonna mess with that. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's elastic, and I can't wait to see what it looks like when he's like 16, 17, 18. It's gonna be amazing.
Yeah, big time, big time. All right, I'm glad we discussed that. That's been on my mind.
That's a great topic. And the next topic you need to ask about different follow-throughs. People are obsessed with how you follow through, and should you windshield wiper, and why does Alcaraz come around his head like this? These are the mysteries of forehand technique.
I remember you did a little breakdown, I think, of Kyrgios, and he did like every finish in one point. In one point, he did like a buggy whip, he did a windshield wiper, he did a shoulder. It was all on his forehand during one point, so it was like all over the place.
Yeah, he has a lot of, but the finishes, that's a very common question. People are really confused by finishes.
Yeah.
Kyrgios has an unusual, I would never teach the way he starts with the elbow high and back, but he has an awesome, I mean, I like it, all of his game. He has an amazing ATP technique on backhand too. Backhand's like one of the most compact double-handed backhands on tour. Very
Yeah.
interesting biomechanical. He may even be too compact if that's possible. He may not even generate enough. He's ultra compact. He probably has the most compact ATP two-handed backhand. And his serve, I don't know what people. Sometimes he gets criticism on his serve is incredible, beautiful serve technique, like picture perfect in terms of hitting the biomechanical checkpoints.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the best serve inch for inch out of anybody. So that
Quick
should tell
action
you
too.
everything.
Quick action
Yep.
and like fast.
Flowy.
Like when you look at it biomechanically, if you slow it down in a high speed video and look at like the basic checkpoints that he hits every pro checkpoint that you want to see. Yeah.
All right, we got off track. Let's go to some comments. The first one comes from Rublo. How can a recreational player improve stamina? What exercises can they do on a tennis court? So I'm going to also ask you about off the tennis court, but let's start a specific question. What about on the tennis court? Because Rublo, it sounds like Rublo doesn't want to get on a treadmill exactly and wants to make the stamina
Okay.
better on the court.
I think I have really good answers for this kind of thing because I coach a lot of players who want to have the same questions and on my YouTube channel I get a lot of similar questions, especially if you have recreational adults who want to figure out the easiest solution I think is just to use sort of the Pato Alvarez method and William Pato Alvarez, really famous Spanish coach, like founding father of Spanish tennis. And he took simple drills like the X drill. Maybe some of the viewers have heard of the X drill or the V, like very famous Spanish drills. And he just extended the amount of balls. So instead of doing four, five, six, 8 balls, he would do like 20 balls or 30 balls.
And
And so
these just to be clear for the listener, these are hand feed drills.
can be anything. They're typically hand fed, but could be with a ball machine. You know, a lot of
Okay.
people have access to a ball machine. I recommend certain ball machines to players who are working on their own or with a partner or a friend. And instead of doing like high intensity 4 to 8 reps, jack it up to like 16 to 30 reps and do it in a steady rhythm. It's kind of like a little bit like steady state jogging on a treadmill rather than high intensity training in the gym. But in this case, it's tennis. Like it's more steady state tennis work. You get a lot of reps, and your heart rate will become elevated, and it will actually increase your cardiorespiratory stamina.
Are
And
you
by the way, it's a very safe way to increase your volume of training because there's no risk of like a tendon or ligament. There's no sharp changes of direction. It's just like you do it in a slow rhythmic drill and you go 20 or 30 repetitions rather than the typical lower reps at higher intensity.
right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's pushing yourself, right? Push your cardio often and it gets better, right?
Yeah, you could use a heart rate monitor. They're very common now. You can use a wrist heart rate monitor or a chest strap. A lot of people don't like the chest strap monitors. They are more accurate, but that's a good. If you get your heart rate up, you know that for a prolonged period of time, you're going to be building stamina on the tennis court. It just depends on who you play too. Try to find hitting partners who are grinders. You know,
Yeah,
try to find the Spanish or South American guys. You know, don't you don't want to you're not going to help your stamina if you're playing with like the really tall guy who's serving volleys. You know,
right.
there's just going to be no long point. So if you're just rallying, try to have long rallies, try to play a lot of baseline points. Don't play with the serve because when you serve, serving has actually been shown to when you serve, you have a higher heart rate. The server has a higher heart rate than the returner in general in tennis. But what's interesting is if you take serve out of it, you can play more points and keep your heart rate higher throughout the practice because you can get the ball in more quickly. And that's probably a good way to work on your stamina too. Play more baseline points without the serve.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I find that normally the winner of those games, like if you go baseliners to 15, like normally the better cardio just wins because you're just constantly in baseline rallies.
That's a good way to do
That's
it.
my experience. Are
Yeah.
you quickly, because I want to get to other comments, are you pro or anti long distance running for tennis players?
But that's like a huge controversial question.
I know.
In
I know what
strength,
I
in
told you
strength,
quickly.
in strength and conditioning, that's a huge controversial question. I study a lot with Mark Kovacs, and he strongly advocates, being more doing more tennis specific ratios of training, of cardio work. I still think there's a place for some long distance work, if not for the physical benefits, for the mental benefits, because it helps you focus, and it helps you learn to suffer. So I just think sometimes we focus so much on getting the training tennis specific that we forget some of the psychological benefits. Like, just especially I work with, for example, young kids. Young kids need to learn how to run. Running a few miles is not going to hurt them, and it teaches them concentration. And when you run and it's hard, you suffer, and it develops your character. So while there's a really good case to be made that you would like to make, we really should try to make more of the training sessions like tennis, so the ratios similar to tennis, the work to rest ratios similar to tennis. I still think there's a place for some distance running. You just don't want to overdo it, and you definitely don't want to do it on a hard surface where you can get a lot of pounding. So it should just has to be done in a smart way, and it can be done in a periodized way. So not necessarily every week, maybe in certain blocks of the year. I just think there's a real benefit to teaching, especially with children, getting them out there, teaching them that tennis is about running. You want to know how to run. Good tennis players should be able to run a few miles, no problem.
Yeah, yeah. I love the mental point, the mental aspect of it. This next one is from EB. What should the rec player focus on when transitioning from hard to clay and vice versa? Which is an interesting one because I did this as a junior, but I never thought all too hard about it. Just transitioning between the surfaces.
So the biggest thing, if you're moving from hard to clay, is you're going to want to back up a lot. You're going to back up because the ball is not as clean a bounce. So unless you're playing at Roland Garros, you're going to get a lot of bad bounces unless the court is pristine, and the ball is going to jump more from if you're playing someone who plays with spin, and you just want to give yourself more time to get under the ball and play with a lot, and play with more control and more shape. And so typically, anytime you're struggling, I always recommend players back up. Like, if you're struggling with your consistency, back up off the baseline, give yourself more time and space. So that could work either way. Even if you're transitioning to hard, if you're having trouble with your timing or you're not consistent, the first thing I would do is back up 6, 8, even 6, 8 feet off the baseline. Just start to find your time and space, get your rhythm. And a lot of players, like, they're taught to take the ball in the rise, but then if they're struggling, they're like, there's nowhere to go. Like, they're just missing ball after ball after ball, trying to take short hops, and having trouble with their timing. So that's what I would recommend on clay. Typically, you play with more topspin on clay, so you try to play with a bit more shape and that kind of thing. Did he have any specific trouble that he mentioned, or just
No, just what should the rec player focus on? So moving back to the court position is a good place to it's a good place to start playing with more shape, get some
Anytime,
consistency.
anytime, anytime a player's struggling with their consistency, I push them back 6, 8 feet. And because in the US, a lot of coaches only teach on their eyes. They only teach
Yeah.
position really close to the baseline. And I found in my own game, I remember when I started working on that, I got so much more consistent. I was able to position myself. I wasn't rushed as much. The ball comes up to my waist or between my hips and shoulder, and I can send it with a lot more control when I play deeper. It's very rare to be able, like, to play like a Federer, like right on top of the baseline and play short hops. That is, like, if you're in the zone and you're feeling great, you move up and you can play that way. But if you're struggling with your consistency, if you're making a lot of unforced errors, back up, give yourself a lot more time, and just get control of the point, and get control of your body, and then get control of your shots.
I'm into it. Love it. Next one is from a member, Hi FE9BM. Um, Hi, Gill and Chris. I actually read your book on the secrets of Spanish tennis. While I think it was an excellent read, there are several questions I have on the Spanish game. Can you clarify on the importance of balance and anticipation in the Spanish game and how is it trained? And what is your thoughts on the opinion that shot depth is more important than heaviness of the ball? I feel like a prime example of this is either Murray or Brooksby, where they prioritize shot depth and attack through taking time away, which contrasts the Spanish game. So similar themes here about court position. Then the last line of this is, by the way, learned a lot from your book, especially on the chapter about suffering, and would definitely recommend it to any tennis fan.
Thanks. I really appreciate that endorsement. And if you like the first book, the second book, I mean, even my publisher said this book is so much better. Like I was proud of the first book. The second book is like 10 times better quality and comprehensive. So what was the first one, Gil? He was
So the first
uh,
one was balance and anticipation.
okay. So they have lots of exercises in Spain where they work on first place I ever been to where they talked about training the eyes. Like I didn't really never learn that in the US. I took lots of coaching courses, and in Spain they have these exercises where they try to challenge the eyes, the reaction. The famous drill from Luis Brugueras called reaction. It's in the book where that you throw a lot of random tosses and try to fake out the player, and you basically move the player all over the place, working on their quickness, their reaction, and their balance, and getting set up for the ball. So I think the eyes are somehow culturally that became part of the teaching methodology in Spain. And related to the eyes, it's not just your balance, but is the reading and anticipation. So in Spain, they instead of getting too caught up with technical minutia, they spend a lot of time, whether they're playing points, live ball, or doing drills with reading, like we were saying. We were talking about the outgoing ball, reading the incoming ball, picking it up early, and adjusting your body position optimally to receive the ball, or after you send the ball to move forward and gain ground. It's basically giving and taking ground. So that is the anticipation part. You don't know where to go unless you're reading with your eyes. You have to read with your eyes first, and then you make a quick decision. Do I need to give ground? Am I in trouble? Or do I need to take ground? And so the best players in the world do that so well. They do it intuitively, naturally. And in Spain, they encourage that from the young ages. So I think that's a really powerful aspect of the Spanish system. And do we have another one?
Yeah,
Another
the
question?
second one was how do is depth should depth be prioritized more than heaviness of shot?
I think you definitely want both. So if the best players nowadays, they play heavy and deep. That's really key. And so the way you play, I think there's more the focus is on your just focus on your own acceleration. Are you moving the racket optimally as fast as you can? And that will give you your max speed and heavy ball if you're focusing on your whip and rather than pushing the ball. So most players, especially rec players, they decelerate a lot. So yeah, I mean, you can play that way. Definitely, if you play deep, it's better. It's good because the other player cannot take position in zone two and attack you in the mid court and attack you. But I think obviously the optimum is deep with some heaviness, and heaviness is basically just speed and rotation on the ball. You have two factors:
Yeah.
how much the ball is spinning and how fast the ball is traveling.
And one thing I'll add is the surface can make a difference as to which one is rewarded. So on a clay court where the ball is kicking up like a mule, you might drop a ball around the service line. It might be so heavy that it's unattackable. Whereas on a lower bouncing surface, maybe you hit that same ball and it doesn't have the same effect. Whereas, maybe a slick court where the ball kind of skids through a little bit more, depth might be a more powerful and effective option. I think, you know, as a player, what should you focus on? I think both is probably the best answer. But if you're watching a professional match and you're looking at, okay, like, will this surface suit a certain player's style? It's one of the things I look at.
Yeah, the court plays a big role. You make a good point. I mean, probably at the rec level, it's not as big, but the court is a big factor for the pros. How the ball's going to play off the court. You're right.
Yeah. A few more here. This one's from Joe John. As the sport continues to evolve, what shot might we see more often? maybe more slices in tactical situations, maybe a resurgence in chip and volleys. I say this because the drop shot has always been a shot, but with the recent success of Alcaraz, you can see that specifically the forehand drop shot is being used more than ever, it seems. Even at the recreational level, more and more players are now influenced by it. So yeah, we discussed that, the drop shot going kind of into vogue, everybody wanting to have that in their back pocket. I have some ideas on this question, but what do you think? What's like the next trend that
I think the
perhaps will pop up?
I think the comment's very salient, and the Alcaraz effect with the drop shot is really dramatic. Like you see it at all levels. It's incredible. You know, I see it in at junior high performance, and you see it in
Mhm.
at the club level players. Everybody wants to do it like him. I think the volley. I really would. Maybe I'm dreaming, but I think I would love to see a little more serve and volley again. You know, I grew up, and there were a lot of top professional players who serve and volley. I used to love watching Edberg and Sampras and Rafter, and there's really not that clash of styles anymore. I miss it, and I think what the way players are positioning so deep to return serve nowadays, I think it really opens up that strategy more, you know, because when I was a kid, if I saw a guy standing by the fence, I mean, that was my dream as a serve and volley player as a young kid. You can swing it out wide, you can kick it or slice it, and you can get in tight on the net and make a short volley, and it works like gold, like solid gold strategy. And you see some players try to do that if the guy's standing really far back.
Yeah.
So that's what I would maybe you know, what do you think? Do you think we'll see a little more serve involved? The guys are getting bigger too. I think as the serves get bigger, the guys are yeah, a lot of guys over 6'6". I just think I'd love to see a return of that. We may need to see the courts and balls may need to speed up a little bit, but you know.
Maybe I agree with you. I think there is a scenario where we see more of that, and that scenario is if more returners move back because it did sort of reverberate around the locker room. Okay, we need to do this against Medvedev. Daniil is just an incredible returner. You can hit a great first serve, and it's back at your feet. And there needs to be a way to counter this. And Djokovic did it first, then everybody else started doing it. Those with the skills, at least, those with confidence in their volleys, could serve volley Medvedev. And I think, you know, if team were still playing from the back fence on hard court, you'd see players mix it up against him. So I think it's contingent upon return position trends. But if players are going to go back, players are going to serve volley. That's my take on it.
You're also going to see more underhand serving because that is technically a drop shot. So
Yeah.
one of the reasons why we see that underarm serve being deployed so frequently is because of where returners are standing. You know, if returners weren't standing so deep, then most players wouldn't hit that underhand serve.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to. Oh, I want to also comment quickly on the slice. You know, I'm a little bit torn on the slice. First of all, I'm seeing two-handers hitting low backhands now exceptionally well. Like you have a guy like Taylor Fritz who basically never slices. And it doesn't matter how low the ball, it could be at his ankles. He can hit a good two-handed backhand, which like personally, I find that as a two-hander extremely uncomfortable. When the ball's that low, I need to slice. So I don't know how they do it, but you know, Sinner's the same way. Yes, he can slice, but the ball can be at his ankles and he can hit a great two-hander. So I I don't know. Like I do see a lot of more and more players surviving without the backhand slice. And then the other thing is like when you hit a backhand slice to Carlos Alcaraz, you try to get it to his backhand. His runaround footwork is so good. His generation off of his forehand is so good. And suddenly he's hitting runaround forehands off of your slice. That's a terrible place to be. It's kind of like slicing against Nadal was never a good idea. So I'm not forecasting a rise in backhand slice.
I think you make a good point, Gil. But I think for viewers who watch pro tennis, I think pretty much every pro's got a good slice. They may not use it, but I think maybe people don't realize how good these guys are. Like even if they're playing all the time with their two-hander, they have a slice there that's usually really good. And
Hmm.
so whether so on the develop from the developmental side, which is where I am, pretty much all I want everyone to have a slice, even if they don't use it that much. I want to see that as part of a player development, complete player development. And it can be a useful tool. And I think a lot of times it depends on a player's personality, whether they like to put in a lot of variation in the game, or if they're just going to come at you more one-dimensionally with full force. But you make very good points, and I think even if you don't see the slice, all those pros can slice. Like they all have the skills, they have the skill mastered. Whether they
Yeah.
choose to use it is another thing.
Right. And I'm totally with you developmentally, especially like sometimes defensively, you might need it when you're stretched out. Or do you know how to block the return back? And if you don't develop your slice, that might be a really uncomfortable thing for you to have to, try to learn how to do. And even the volley. So, I would never suggest that people don't learn a slice, but I do think that there are more and more players on the tour who are choosing to not use it very much.
Yeah. On the flip side, for many recreational and developmental players, they slice in a bad way. Like I see many students who will slice because they don't want to move their feet, or they will slice because they're not confident in hitting their two-hander or one-handed topspin, and that is a very common problem for players who are learning. And so many times you have to get over that psychological hurdle and not slice for a while just to develop your topspin stroke. And I think that's a common scenario. Got to watch out for that.
Yeah. All right, let's do two more, Chris. This one's from Gab Manini. Hey, Gil and Chris, I was wondering what it is about backhand forehand technique that will make it consistent or an inconsistent shot. For example, what is it about Medvedev's backhand that allows him to make 50 in a row without missing? And what is it about Lehechka's backhand that makes him miss so often? Or is it nothing to do with technique, just some player having riskier tactics or being less concentrated? Or are there actual flaws slash features to the way someone hits the ball that affects their consistency? So let me jump in here. Like it's case by case, and like that's always the answer to a question like this. Um, but what I could ask you going off of this question is when you see inconsistency at a high level, do you think it's usually more so the technique, or do you think it's usually more so shot selection, mentality, focus, tactics?
I think at the pro level, it's more of the latter. Like you said, it's going to be their shot selection. They could be distracted or slightly fatigued or losing focus. Because I think the amazing thing about pro level players is they can hit if they wanted to. I tell this to my students a lot. They could just hit 100 ball rallies there back and forth. It'd be the most boring match you ever saw, and there'd be very few misses because they're that good. Like they've reached a point, a threshold of myelination in their strokes, of automation that most of us cannot even comprehend. Like they just it's in their DNA to make these swings. So whether the swings are whether they could be more optimized biomechanically, it's possible that there are many pros out there who you could make that case, but they've done it so many times that they've myelinated that movement, and that movement is pure automation. So it's probably something more psychological or mental that's in the or tactical. Like maybe I always tell my students that the pros they're that good they could just basically the rallies would go on forever, but they're playing each other, and someone's going to take risk. Someone's going to like put more power on the shot or angle, and someone's going to put pressure, and that's the only reason they miss. If they wanted to, if they just stayed in rally mode, it would be some very and sometimes they fall into those rallies from time to time. You see like two guys and they just decide, okay, I'm going to go cross court, I'm not going to miss, and the other guy says, all right, I'll do the same, and you end up with like a 30-40 stroke rally. And it doesn't happen frequently, but that's very common in terms of and as an example of like how solid these guys are if they didn't want to attack.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like let's go to the specifics of the question. Lehechka hits his backhand way harder than Medvedev on average. We looked at the data actually on the latest Monday match analysis with Tom Corey. Daniil's not a very hard hitter of the tennis ball. He hits very flat and very deep. It stays low. It's difficult to attack, but he's not looking to really rope his backhand. That plays into the consistency along with some other factors. But Lehechka is on the other end, like he's smoking his two hander and it's flat. So there's less margin there. Let's go to the last one. This is from Coyd, and it is a weird question, which is written in the question. It says, weird question, but why don't we see more lobs on the Pro Tour? You can hit one from virtually every position. You take less risk than a standard passing shot. And if done right, your opponent doesn't have a chance, even if they guess. I understand that pro players have really good overheads, but they can also practice the lob enough that they should be able to get it over their opponents. Thanks for the great work as always. Okay, why not more lobs on the Pro Tour?
I don't think that's a weird question. I think it's a legitimate question. And I have a good answer. The men are very tall, and their height is increasing, over the decades now, the average height of male players. And they're incredibly explosive and fast. It's very hard to get the ball up and over these incredible athletes. So you put up a good lob with topspin, you think it's golden, and the guy just takes two crossover steps back, and these guys all have great verticals. These are the best athletes in the world. It's a lot harder than you think to get a lob up and over a pro. When you see a successful lob, it's really special, actually. It's pretty amazing when you think about how fast these guys are, and they're all tall. On the women's side, you don't get as many women coming to net. They're maybe not quite as quick and explosive. They're also a lot of them are tall as well, but you don't see too many players at the net, and they're not as tall as the men in terms of the geometry. Like when you measure the space, you got 39 feet there, and you do the calculation with the height and how fast someone is. That's going to determine whether you can lob or not,
Yeah, yeah. I'll add one other thing because there's a big thing in like recreational doubles of how worried should you be about the lob. And I guess the same thing would be in singles, like when people hear your advice to move back if you're having consistency trouble, and then people say, well, what about the drop shot? Like, shouldn't I worry about the drop shot? The one thing I would point to is incoming ball. Like when a pro steps inside the court and hits a good approach shot, that is a difficult ball to handle. That is where, like, yes, that's tough. That's tough to lob. If you hit a poor approach shot, then maybe the lob becomes more high percentage. But I think with any like finesse shot like that, that has to be so precise, which is what you're talking about, Chris. I would not discount the fact that you're not coming in off of a rally ball. You're coming in off of a damaging ball, and that makes the execution of the lob so difficult. So same thing I would say for the drop shot. If you hit, and I'll use our terminology that we love, if you hit a good trade is hard to drop shot. So even if you're 7 feet back in the court, if your ball has depth, then it'd take a very skillful drop shot in order to get beaten by it. That's what I would add.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The speed of the game is definitive. Like it's an unbelievably high speeds, and the approach shots are coming in very, very powerfully. So that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, Chris, this has been awesome. A lot of fun as always. Where can people find your stuff on YouTube? Channel's called Chris Lewit, right?
Yeah, it's just youtube.com/Chris Lewit, and we're doing a lot of new videos there. I'm trying to share my instructional perspective, and we talk about biomechanics, Spanish tennis, a lot of interesting stuff on the channel. I think player development, and I just try to share my wisdom with everyone, and it's a very friendly channel. And the book is now everywhere. The Secrets of Spanish Tennis 2.0. It's at Amazon. It'll be in bookstores. So I hope people enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.